This is a program about the tactics and techniques of guerrilla warfare. We've started off with a bang by looking at this US Marine who went behind enemy lines into North Vietnam and lived to tell the tale. In today's video, I want to take an in-depth look at the circumstances that led to this kind of mission being conducted, and then the actual mission itself. This is me from the channel. Welcome to the show. Now, if you've seen my other videos on infiltration tactics, or even the video I did on the Japanese sneak attack against the US base in the Philippines in World War II, you'll know that going behind enemy lines is not for the faint of heart. In fact, missions like this are almost certain death missions. And yet there are ways that soldiers can be trained to conduct these kinds of operations and survive. In some cases, they might even come back with critical intelligence. Let's talk about how that happens in this video. Okay, so first things first. Who was this Marine, and why did he go behind enemy lines? His name was Johnny McNamara, and he was a member of the Marine Security Guard unit based out of Okinawa, Japan. He was part of a 5-man team who were tasked with going behind enemy lines into North Vietnam to take photographs of a SAM site, a surface-to-air missile battery. These SAM sites could shoot down aircraft, which meant that if the US wanted to fly bombing missions over North Vietnam, those SAM sites had to be destroyed. But destroying them was hard. These SAM sites were typically surrounded by anti-aircraft guns, and they were protected by infantry, sometimes even tanks. So getting close enough to these SAM sites to get a good enough firing solution to destroy them was a challenge. You needed to get within several miles of these sites, which was extremely difficult. So what the US did was task their Marine security guards with conducting these dangerous reconnaissance missions. Now, normally Marines don't go on reconnaissance missions. That's usually done by Army Special Forces units. Special Forces guys who are trained in living off the land, navigating through jungle terrain, and moving undetected. Marines are more often the guys who provide the firepower when Special Forces elements call in a fire mission. But in this case, since the Marines had already been deployed out to Okinawa, they were the ones who were tasked with conducting this reconnaissance mission. Okay, so what were the alternatives to sending these Marines behind enemy lines? Why not just send in an unmanned drone instead? Well, firstly, the technology didn't really exist back then. Sure, there were drones, but they were big, slow, and very easy to detect and shoot down. They also couldn't carry a camera with high enough resolution to take photographs. Secondly, the US needed this mission to happen quickly. There wasn't time to wait for a drone to be sent in and to have the reconnaissance photos developed. They needed boots on the ground. Okay, so now that we know why the Marines were sent behind enemy lines, let's talk about how they did it. First of all, they had to get to North Vietnam. That wasn't easy because North Vietnam was heavily defended by both air defenses and by troops along the border. So what they did was they infiltrated along the DMZ, or demilitarized zone, that existed between North and South Vietnam. They crossed over in civilian clothes in the dead of night. But once they got across the border, they then had to get to the target, which was at least 40 miles away. And to do that, they were dropped off at a prearranged location where they had to make their way through the jungle to the target. They were provided with maps and compasses to navigate. But the bigger challenge was staying hidden. As you'll know if you've watched my videos on jungle warfare, jungles are very loud places. Animals everywhere are making noise, so it's hard to hear people coming. But the biggest challenge is usually not hearing yourself move. Leaves, branches, and vines are constantly falling from trees, and the sound of your own movement is deadened by the thick underbrush. It's actually quite hard to move around without making a lot of noise. For example, stepping on a twig or leaf can be very loud. Walking on a soft, muddy section of ground can cause a lot of noise. Even breathing can make a lot of noise in the jungle. The jungle really does make you hyper-vigilant, since the person making the least amount of noise is likely to be the one who survives. But there's also another problem. Your eyes aren't much use in the jungle either. There's very little visibility. You can only see a few meters in front of you. And even that is tough, because the jungle is full of tricks. Trees seem to appear out of nowhere. Light never really penetrates the canopy enough for you to properly see. And foliage grows in strange shapes that seem almost alien. So navigating through the jungle is very difficult. You literally cannot rely on your eyes. Instead, you have to rely on your ears and your sense of touch and smell. What made it worse for this reconnaissance team was the fact that it was monsoon season, which meant that the jungle was at its most deadly. Rivers had flooded, the undergrowth was thick, and mud clung to everything. But the team moved through the jungle undetected, probably thanks to the fact that they had been trained extensively in jungle warfare. What's interesting here is that the Marines were trained in jungle warfare by the British. After all, the British were experts at fighting in the Malayan jungle against the Japanese during the Second World War. And after the war, the British continued to develop their expertise in counterinsurgency warfare, including jungle warfare. As a result, they ran training programs for the U.S. Marines and taught them the skills they would need to survive in the Vietnamese jungle. It took the team 2 days to reach the outskirts of the SAM site. Then they had to set up an observation post and wait for a surface-to-air missile battery to arrive. They knew that the SAM battery would pass by every morning at the same time, but they had to wait 2 more days before it arrived. Finally, the day came, and they observed the SAM battery setting up its equipment. They watched for 2 hours as trucks and jeeps and infantrymen arrived. Once the site was active, Johnny took photographs of the entire site from different angles. But soon afterwards, an NVA soldier spotted him. Johnny immediately grabbed his M16 rifle and fired 3 warning shots into the air. The soldier froze. Johnny then stood up, waving his hands in the air and yelling, "Don't shoot. I am a friend." Somehow the soldier didn't shoot him. Johnny then walked over and grabbed the soldier and brought him back to his observation post. He interviewed the soldier and learned that the SAM site was manned by a mix of North Vietnamese army soldiers and local militia. He also learned that the site would remain active until sunset. Johnny then released the soldier and returned to his observation point. He spent another 9 hours watching the SAM site, taking photographs until finally he heard the distant sound of helicopters. It was his extraction team arriving. They landed, and he signaled to them by lighting a green flare. Unfortunately, the flare landed in some dried leaves and started a small bushfire. Johnny immediately panicked, thinking that the smoke would alert the enemy to his position. But thankfully, the extraction team saw the flare anyway and came to his position. He got on board the helicopter, and they lifted off just as the sun began to set. The whole time, Johnny had been wearing civilian clothes, which helped him blend in with the local population. In fact, he had been carrying the camera in a Vietnamese backpack, which also helped him avoid detection. Once on the helicopter, they flew back to their base in Okinawa. Johnny had survived going behind enemy lines. What happened next was probably even scarier. Back at the base, Johnny developed the film and showed the photographs to his commanding officers. Then they called in Air Force strike aircraft to destroy the SAM site. But just before the Air Force guys launched their attack, Johnny had a bad feeling that something had gone wrong. He looked at the photographs again and realized that he hadn't taken a photograph of the exact coordinates of the SAM site. It turned out that the aircraft missed the target, failing to destroy the SAM site. Okay, so what happened next? Well, the Air Force conducted several more bombing runs against the SAM site. But the SAM site kept shooting down aircraft. It turned out that Johnny had actually been so close to the SAM site that he hadn't been able to see the whole thing. Also, since the photographs had been taken on a normal camera with regular film, photographs weren't immediately available for the air crews to use. As a result, the entire site was lost to the U.S., and several U.S. aircraft were shot down by the SAM site. This story is important because it shows how dangerous infiltration missions are. These missions are never easy, and they always carry an element of risk. Infiltration teams must be prepared to fight their way in and out. They must be ready to defend themselves against enemy forces. But perhaps most importantly, they must be able to stay hidden in the enemy territory for extended periods of time. If they're not careful, they could be detected and killed. But if they're smart and well-trained, they can gather valuable intelligence and live to tell the tale. What do you think? Do you think you could go behind enemy lines? Let me know in the comments section below. Check out my other videos on guerrilla warfare. Thank you to my supporters, and thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.